Grüß, willkommen in einem aufregendes video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 38 of my figure gaming video series. In this video I'll be looking at how the internet has influenced my personal figure gaming hobby experience. There is minimal science involved in this video. It's all about my journey and how I noticed the hobby has changed because of the internet. We should all thank DARPA for creating a nuclear war-proof network back in the late 1960s. Unless you've lived under a rock for the last 40 years, the internet has had a major impact on all our lives since the late 1980s. The impact on our hobby, that is figure gaming, is no exception. The impact we may initially notice is our gaming stores. Basically, the old-fashioned bricks and mortar retail outlets have been significantly impacted by the internet. While those used to buying rules, figures and paints from a store may not consider this as a particularly good experience, as I do appreciate the way I can purchase anything I want all around the world, regardless. So putting aside those who really do love the bricks and mortar store experience, those who have embraced the internet and have purchased a large range of products from across the world, which they would never normally be able to purchase locally, they would probably consider the internet as a force of good. For those who consider the impact as overall good, and even though I like bricks and mortar stores, I have to admit there are more advantages than disadvantages, then I should thank, or you should all thank, DARPA for creating what was then a nuclear-proof network. Another example of how the atomic bomb has possibly benefited us all, perhaps. However, apart from how we actually buy our products, the internet has had other, more significant effects on our hobby. I consider these effects overall as quite good, but of course the one downside of the internet is if all you do is sit in a darkened room looking at your computer screen, that is certainly less interactive than a meeting with your friends at a local club. As long as you do not neglect the face-to-face interaction aspect of the hobby, then the internet's impact will be completely positive. I suspect my experiences may be similar to many gamers who were teenagers back in the 1970s and 80s, but after becoming heavily involved in the hobby from 74 to 86, I left the hobby to pursue my real-life career. One of the downsides of getting married, getting a mortgage, and being forced to work almost to the bone in order to afford all these things. When the company I was working for was taken over in 2010, I found myself with less work and more free time, which was good for my hobby, but not so much for my career, perhaps. While sitting in one of the identical cubes from my company scattered across Asia Pacific with not much to do, I decided to investigate the figure gaming hobby to see what had changed and what had not since I last went into this or studied it back in, let's say, the late 80s. My first project was to identify a set of rules which I should learn, and once this was decided, I would bring out my figures which had been stored in boxes since 1986. I'm uncertain why, but I decided to initially look into ancients. Ancients were never my primary interest, so I'm uncertain why I went down this path at this point in time, but I quickly latched on to DBM in early 2012 and started studying the rules. I began this investigation on the internet and discovered Yahoo Groups. This was the first crossover between the internet and figure gaming that I experienced, and I thought it was excellent. I could download cheat sheets, game guides, and even old copies of the rules. The latter was very useful because almost every gaming shop I was aware of had closed. I do remember spending an awful lot of effort trying to find gaming stores when I was in the US, unsuccessfully. I remember still taking the light rail in Portland to Hillsborough, where there was a large hobby store on the main street. It had some gaming stuff, but it was pretty minimalistic and certainly didn't satisfy my requirement for hardcore rules or figures that I'd be interested in purchasing. When I moved to Boston, I found the Hobby Bunker in Wakefield. It had more hobby material, but it was still pretty bare compared to the old days. I also discovered why it was called the Hobby Bunker when I saw the store entrance. It really did look like the entrance to the Figurenspiel bunker. I then made a really major effort when I went to San Francisco and the Bay Area to find something, and I dropped by a lot of stores in the Bay Area and downtown San Fran. But while there was some material which could be useful, it was nothing like the hobby stores of the 1980s. I'd come to the conclusion if I wanted to buy rules, I needed to do via the internet and have it delivered by mail, which is exactly what I did. The internet, of course, was incredibly helpful in that as well, and I ended up getting a lot of different rules from a host of stores, most of which I must admit was in the UK. The discovery I could download old rules from the Yahoo group so I could investigate the rules in more detail was also a godsend and assisted me greatly in my rules research. While I found the Yahoo groups useful for DBM, I found trying to learn the rules from a rules book incredibly difficult. I got in the habit of creating example documents, which assisted me, and I must admit there was a lot of DBM I really liked. My issue was teaching opponents. In order to teach someone a set of rules, you need to know the rules backwards. Without significant gaming experience, this is almost impossible to achieve for a complex set of rules like DBM. I was still working in Asia Pacific for the most part, mainly Japan, so I had not yet re-entered the club scene and was working on finding people interested in figure gaming and trying to teach them the rules. By now I had brought out my two 15mm ancient armies, which had suffered some corrosion to my consternation. Trying to teach someone DBN on a kitchen table with someone who had minimal English skill did not work very well for me, especially since I kept on stopping the game as I tried to work out the answers to questions which were thrown at me constantly during the game. As my initial playing areas consisted of a green sheet with some felt and books, it was also not providing me with the required level of bling to interest a typical otaku used to anime figures. Perhaps if I had a samurai army, it may have worked better in Japan, but unfortunately the whole exercise was not very successful. I then went back to the drawing board. Back in early 2013, DBA3 was being developed and I got involved in the rules review and playtesting process. Once again, this was due to the internet and Yahoo groups. My rules format suggestions were ignored, but the whole experience allowed me to become proficient in DBA as I conducted a forensic analysis of the rules. Unfortunately, I learnt the beta rules, and whenever I try and play DBA3, I always get caught up with minor changes between the beta and the final production. One of the issues of getting involved in the rules too early. I have to admit DBA3 did work out much better for me, but while involved with those rules, I discovered DBA 2.2 and WADBAG, which stands for Washington Area de Bella Enquetes Gamers. They published a reasonably good guide back in 2006, which was available as a download, and this got me involved in DBA 2.6 gaming, at least what they call 2.6. I was very impressed with this guide. In conclusion, I discovered the internet could be used to obtain a host of supporting information which could allow players to learn figure gaming. I then thought about looking for old rules which I used back in the 1980s and found many Yahoo groups which covered those rules. The main set of rules were Core Commander, which had a Yahoo group. I cannot remember who created the site, and that person had long since disappeared, but I did converse with him when the Yahoo groups were still around, and I decided to flip my focus to these rules. I'll not bore anyone with my attempts at modifying these rules, but in the end I decided to intensively study the rules and create an extensive example document based on the original rules. These documents were monsters, with Core Commander OMG and TRTB versions having almost 200 pages each. I also took the opportunity to incorporate all the errata into the example document, of which there was an awful lot. This was especially the case for OMG, as it was the older set of rules. To assist me in playing the rules, I also created a host of game aids, such as an extensive cheat sheet set. I also discovered the importance of game turn limits to games with clear objectives, and as a result, I created quite a few game turn record tracks. And of course, unfortunately with Core Commander, there was a requirement for lots of game markers and counters. I created them as well. I then finally created an extensive series of scenarios spanning a host of historical periods ranging from 1939 to 1989. Of course, all this material was posted on the Yahoo group site. I did consider Facebook, but quickly dropped this as the interface was horrible and it's not really designed for the sharing of PDF files. I also looked at Google Groups, and while better than Facebook, it offered no real benefits over Yahoo Groups, at least at the time. While I was in Seattle in 2017, Yahoo Groups started to implode, and I began to look for alternatives. One of the people who developed the original Yahoo Groups left Yahoo several years prior and created something called IO Groups, which was supposed to be an alternative to Yahoo Groups. I finally decided to create IO Groups for Call Commander, both Call Commanders, in June 2018 and started migrating the various files over to IO Group before the Yahoo Groups totally imploded. I had created as a test in the IO Group a initial site for my quick play version of Call Commander, which I call Call Commander or KK in May 2018. So I was fairly familiar with the site. It's just that when I created this, I didn't see much advantage over this compared to Yahoo Groups. But with Yahoo Group basically going away, I had no choice but to migrate to this platform. And I generally consider it as a very good platform. While Yahoo Groups was fully self-destructing, I moved the LWRS rules over to the IO Group platform, which was still being managed by the author Andrew Stevenson and has been growing slowly but surely since. I can highly recommend these rules to anyone as they're very playable and easy to learn. Prior to me moving LWRS over to IO Groups, I had reformatted LWRS and called it Bevegunskrig, and I posted this on the IO Group site in May 2018. These are the same rules as LWRS, but are now formatted into my standard case system with cross-referencing. The rules come in 3 formats: 1 column, 12-point, 2 column, 10-point, 3 column, 8-point. Along with this, I've created examples, cheat sheet scenarios, and a host of other play aids. All these game aids can be used with the original rules. I did this to assist me in teaching new players these rules. While the rules are actually fairly simple, in order to get a quick, tight game, particularly since I wasn't playing it that regularly, I did need a lot of cheat sheets which allowed me to get into or game aids which allowed me to get into the game quickly and avoided the need for me to constantly cross-reference the original rules. And then Yahoo Groups announced all files will be lost, and I decided that I might as well try and save as many Yahoo Group sites as I could along with their supporting files. I started with BGMR in November 2019, which are probably the state of the art for squad scale rules and is possibly the endpoint of the evolution from WRG and Challenger. I also need to thank Gordon Dunn, who assisted with saving the World War II versions of these rules. The site is possibly my most popular site, even though I'll have to be honest, I don't normally game in this scale anymore. I then saved the Command Decision site in March 2020. There's not too many files, but the original Yahoo Group mailing list link is included and is still available for people if they so desire. It's not a particularly popular site as there are other sources or other sites that gamers can go to, and there really wasn't that much content in the Yahoo site. I then saved the BBWW2B or Bloody Big World War II Battles files. This site is managed by the author, Bob McKenzie, and I personally feel the basic rules are very good, simple and fun. Bob has his own site, the link is in the group. I've since retasked this with all my other big battle type rules, basically the board game conversions, etc., primarily around Napoleonics these days. But nonetheless, I saved what I could of Bob's rules. However, I must admit, if you want the latest rules, you should go to Bob's actual site and you can download the original or the latest versions. I also saved the old Wargamer Digest rules posted on the Yahoo Group site in July 2019 under the name of Kriegsspiel Zusammenfassung. The rules printed in the magazine were not complete, so I filled in the gaps and created a possible final version as well. I did like these rules when they first came out, and while not complete, I used them with my 172 Airfix tanks and figures back in the early 1970s. There are also a number of smaller Yahoo Groups sites which I saved and placed on top of a single IO Group site, in this case Schwerpunk and Stonk. My figure game version of the SPI Modern Battles board game is also contained here, which I call Neu Schwerpunk. as well as other board game conversions that I've posted here. This generally is my World War II board game conversion IO group site. I also saved a number of other ancient Napoleonic rules and placed it in an IO group site I originally created for TO and E's, which I call Kriegsspiel. I also have saved a bunch of other miscellaneous things here, board games, etc. This is generally my miscellaneous IO group site. I also did create an IO group for an old set of rules popular in Australia and New Zealand back in the 1970s, 80s, which managed to find its way to Europe somehow. I suspect it may have something to do with the Tin Soldier Company, which came from Australia. Unfortunately, when I created this, IO group no longer offered free storage after September of whatever this year is, so the rules had to be accessed by a link provided in the group, basically over to Google Groups, and it works reasonably well. I also saved an old set of Napoleonic club rules that I managed to find in one of my records from somewhere. This was based on DBA, and I thought I would ensure they were always available for future historians by posting it up here. From memory, I only probably had a few games using these rules, and from memory they seemed to work, although I have to admit the rules themselves didn't seem like they were particularly complete. After the frenzy of trying to save as much as I could, and I have to admit a lot of good material was lost for good, I went back to learning rules, getting all my figures out, rebasing them and painting up new figures. My other focus was creating good-looking playing areas, which became a main focus for me for several years. It took me many years, but I finally arrived at a solution which kind of makes me happy. While I was engaged in these pursuits, I started looking at YouTube for supporting information. This began with creating terrain and basing figures. After a gap of 20 years, I had forgotten how I based my figures and had to relearn this skill. While I found a lot of useful info on YouTube concerning terrain and figure painting and basing, which I really did appreciate, unfortunately I did not find much useful material on rules on the internet, at least at this point. That has changed in the last, let's say, 5 years. When I originally created this video, there were some useful videos, such as the short videos for DBN, but most videos were very long example games. I did watch some, but there was a lot of nothing happening as it was live, and often when players did something, it was not explained clearly what was happening. So I didn't find the early videos particularly useful in terms of learning how to play the rules. However, while I have to, whatever criticism I have, at least there were some videos for some popular rules such as DBN, but for many other rules there was nothing. It was then, while I was being forced to take corporate CBT training, I realized you could create videos on rules in a similar manner to creating videos on how to, code C or create HTTP code. So my YouTube experience was born. In June 2019, I created my first YouTube video. I started with a German version, but quickly flipped to English. Initially, I used an artificial voice, but after several complaints, moved to a human voice. I've created a host of videos with two main streams, a game design theory, which focuses on rules mechanics, and a game hints, which focuses on terrain, painting, basing, and associated topics. I've also created historical videos, which I use to assist me in the creation of scenario and also to create specs for vehicles for other rules. I also created an extensive series of training videos on a number of rules. These are very boring, but if you're interested in learning rules, can be very useful. After a run-in with the YouTube algorithm, I've created a duplicate Bitchute and Rumble site. I do not promote this site and only use it as a backup, but amazingly enough, I do get some subscribers, which I find astounding. Over the years since I started doing YouTube videos, I noticed more and more people were posting videos. The DBMM group in Hong Kong has created some rather good videos on DBMM. Another good example is Great War Spearhead. There are many larger sites, but what I'm noticing is if a site is monetized, it focuses on popular topics which are entertaining but do not provide me with really useful information. Thus, I tend to focus on the smaller YouTube sites who are not monetized and who are posting based on a desire to expand the hobby, which is pretty much where I sit. The internet has had a significant impact on the hobby. While there are negative effects, such as causing the old gaming stores to die in the most part, there are many positive effects as well. No matter where you are, you can obtain any type of figure from any place in the world, which I consider a very positive impact, apart from the fact that now I have lots more choice and it takes a lot more research to determine what I need to buy. You can also obtain any set of rules from anywhere in the world, in many cases in PDF format, which initially I didn't like, but now I love PDF format rules because you can search in PDF. In addition, many people also post their freeware rules on the internet, some of which are rather good. LWRS is a classic example of that. You can also join global communities by using forums such as IO Groups, Temp and Wargamers Forum, and obtain yet additional game aids and material to enhance your hobby experience. You can use YouTube to get hints on how to create your armies, prepare your playing areas, and learn rules. None of this replaces club games, competition games, and games at your friends' homes, but it does supplement it greatly and assists you in ramping up your hobby interest. Of course, one big downside is choice. When you enter this hobby, it can be daunting. That unfortunately can only be resolved with effort and research and helpful advice from friends. And so we come to an end of episode 39 of my figure gaming hobby series, in this case analysing the impact of the internet on the wargaming or figure gaming hobby. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.